pacing. Let's go general principles of pacing and how we progress that. And I think the first thing that comes to mind is we start long and slow.
Mm-hmm.
If someone's capable of going long, it might be starting slow and then building long well for a lot of people who don't have the ability to go out and do a nice leisurely 60-minute walk yet. And then over time, increasing speed and increasing pace.
Yeah, in general, it is long to slow or easy to harder, right? Whatever that means. But easy to harder is more important than long to short. The reason being is because of what you said. So let's say MAP 10, right? Like we classify MAP 10 as really easy aerobic work that you can do for hours and hours and hours. What if someone can't do anything for hours? Like what if someone can't go outside and take a walk for hours? Then that progression looks a lot different for them. So the progression for them is there's two parts to it. Part number one is I want you to go from 5 minutes walking to 2 hours of walking. That's progression number one. So when we look at, what kind of aerobic work that is using our language, that's a very long MAP 10 progression because we need them to walk for hours. Okay, we're 3 years down the road, right? Maybe not that long for some people, but we're 3 years down the road. They went from 5 minutes walking to 2 hours walking. Now we can start to think about, long to short because now they can go long, but you have to be able to go long before you can progress from long to short. I think a lot of coaches, when they think about MAP 10 to 1, the progression of like hours of work to 30-second intervals, they think, I'm going to do MAP 10 in like a 15-minute block at the end of training, and that'll be my MAP 10 work. And I'm just going to tell them in language like, this is like cool down effort, go really slow, blah, blah, blah. And then they might try to progress them down to MAP 9. And it's like, you have to understand if that person can actually do work for hours first before you even start to think about progressing them down. So I think we have to think about it those two ways. But I think the most important thing is that you can do work for hours.
Yeah.
Like that can be someone's progression for the rest of their life, and that's really good aerobic work.
Yeah, I mean, you think about what people typically need to do in breathing and in work in their daily lives, and it is that ability to like go for a walk and not have to think about it, versus how often do we really need to sprint and go really fast? Not often at all. Maybe there's an emergency scenario. They're going to figure it out if they need to, But first of all, let's make sure we give them that ability to do that amount of work and don't skip that step.
Yeah, to make people really comfortable. If you're sprinting for your life, usually it's from an animal. We're not faster than those animals that we're sprinting from, so I don't care who you are, you're going to get caught.
Thanks, Carl. That was really heartwarming. I feel so much better about all the aerobic work I do.
It's true. Yeah, it's the truth, though. It's the truth.
Yeah.
I won't get into that. There's a funny story not funny story. That's a bad, terrible way to put it. There's a story, like this thought on like human evolution and what we were meant to do in aerobic work and why we sweat and blah, blah, blah. And it was actually to chase down prey because we're not fast enough to really catch them, but we can out-endure them. So that's like that's why we sweat the way that we sweat. That's why we're not that's why we don't have a bunch of fur on us. Well, some people. We don't have a bunch of fur on us. And it's like we have that regulation of temperature better than a lot of animals. It's so we can out-endure them. But it's not to save our lives, it's to eat.
Interesting.
But you look at, evolution and our lack of need of doing those things over so many years, so many centuries. And humans, no, I don't want to say all humans, most humans don't have that capability anymore. Most humans don't have the ability to run for 25 minutes without stopping at a slow pace. So if we were out like catching food right now and let's say we see a coyote and we're like, yep, that coyote looks delicious. It's like what we would have done, thousands of years ago is we would have just been like, okay, boom, let's go. We're going to just jog at this coyote on this open plain or in this desert. And eventually this coyote is going to have to stop because they cannot regulate their temperatures. Then we're going to catch that coyote and then we're going to kill it and we're going to eat it. Most people can't run for those 25 minutes anymore. So we're losing that.
I think we could do it. I think that should be part of our, whatever our OPEX physical fitness test ends up being, I think we should go out in the mountains, find a javelina or a coyote and just chase it.
I'll go coyote over javelina. We had
Those
this
things are
conversation
brutal.
on our walk this morning. Carson's like, "What smells worse, a coyote or javelina?" And I'm like, "Not even a contest.
No.
It's a javelina.
They're
These things are disgusting."
Ooh, so gross. Okay.
Sorry,
So,
pacing.
back to pacing. So, we've talked about going easy to potentially harder over time. If someone can, going longer to slower, so long as they build up that base of volume at that slow pace. We're talking about cyclical efforts right now.
Yep.
So, we're talking about spinning on a bike, going for a walk, doing a row, and that is the initial progression.
Yep.
What happens next?
Oh man, I don't know, Georgia. I don't know what happens next. Theoretically, what should happen next is, again, has to be based on what that person wants to do. Because I don't want to lay out, and I just want to be like very particular about this. I don't want to lay this out as like this is a progression that everyone has to go through, because someone can progress cyclical work over time for the rest of their lives. And what progression means is just keeping it up, right? Just doing it. So it's like what we talked about with that 5-minute walk to 2-hour walk. Progression for that person might be, one day I want to walk 5 hours straight, right? And like you can train, quote unquote, to do that for a really long time. So it might just be cyclical for some people. But if we lay this out in terms of like what should it be before you go to the next thing, it's like you should be able to pace effectively and know your gears cyclically before you do anything else. So what does that mean? It's like, again, we go out on that 2-hour hike. Do you understand your 2-hour gear? Do you understand what pace you should go at that 2-hour gear? We're doing 500-meter row intervals. Do you understand your gears as it relates to 500-meter row intervals? And I'm not saying everyone has to row, but just as an example of about 2 minutes of work, do you understand your 2-minute gears? So get really good at that cyclically. So cyclical work could look like walking, hiking, biking, swimming. That's more difficult for most people. Swimming.
I'm like a fish in the water, Carl.
Can you go for 2 hours straight, swim?
No, I don't know. Probably not.
Okay. If you ever want to try it, I'll watch you.
Yeah, we'll try it.
I can't do it.
In Idaho.
I will sing. Skipping, like anything, right? Like that would all be considered cyclical activity. So once you have mastered your gears, that long to short, if that's the progression you're going into, or that just long piece, if that's the only type of work you're going to do, that's fine. The next thing would just be mixed cyclical. So now you're perfecting your gears on different like implements or in different scenarios. So if you're walking, biking, swimming, it's like you've perfected your gears in walking, biking, swimming, right? Like all independently. And then once you've mastered that, now you can do them all together, right? Like for inside of a training session. In a gym, it's like if you're rowing, you're bike erging, and you're running, right? Like you've mastered all of those things before you try to like organize all of them together. So just be mixed cyclical activity, or that could just be like assault biking and jump roping, or running and jump roping. So just little things like that.
Yeah. And why you wouldn't go straight to mixed cyclical, why you keep it isolated, just rowing before we go row bike ski together. Those row bike ski, they're all going to have a slightly different dose. There's a different, turnover that's happening on each piece of equipment. It's just more to organize your brain around when it comes to pacing.
Yeah, every cyclical endeavor has its own specific contraction type and rate to it. So ski erging and rowing, let's actually go way different. Ski erging and bike erging, those contraction types and rates are so different. If you got really good on the ski erg and you're like, okay, now I can do anything cyclically, and I can like pace it and I know my gears, you're going to get on the biker and you're like, what's this feeling in my legs? I'm not used to this because I'm used to doing this motion. So every cyclical endeavor has a different contraction type and a different contraction rate. Most cyclical endeavors are very lower body dominant outside of the ski erg, but probably not a very functional movement for a lot of people. I just think it's a nice machine and a good change up. But most cyclical endeavors are lower body dominant. So yeah, just understanding your gears on each one of those things before you can like do them interchangeably is really important.